thank you, John, for the invitation to come and talk about populism. I spend most of my time talking about Brexit, and I think the thing to say at the beginning is I do think we shouldn't use the term Brexit. Brexit is going to be the event when it happens 2019. If it happens, we can debate that later. I think we should talk more about the withdrawal process itself. The UK is going through a withdrawal process. It is horrendously complicated. If we go back to earlier points about referendum, people's decisions, and back to the media, and many of these issues were never explained what Brexit, or what the idea of leaving the European Union would actually look like. In terms of, it's a binary, you either vote to remain in or you vote to leave, but leave was never explained. And it is, for political scientists, it's really fascinating to look at exactly what is happening. But there are so many challenges, there are opportunities, but there are so many challenges ahead. We wonder how the UK is going to deal with them. And for me, much of it is, and well, you'll see in terms of the EU withdrawal process, the EU withdrawal bill will return to Parliament on the 14th. There are already 400 amendments to it. There are problems we know within the Conservative Party. Wait till it gets to the Lords, and the whole process, in terms of even if there is an agreement, is going to be ratified by all EU 27 member states and the European Parliament. So lots of problems ahead. One of the issues I think relates back to democracy in all of this, and for many of those people, and we'll look at them very shortly, who voted for Brexit, were they angry? Were they really annoyed, worried about their future? What is it they're expecting in terms of once the UK leaves? What if what they were thinking they were going to get doesn't actually materialise? What do they do then? How do they actually feel? We maybe come back and look at some of this. In recent weeks, in fact in last week, I don't know if I can actually ignore this. In many ways you see an attack on universities in terms of what are we actually teaching here. For those of us who feel a little bit passionate about this, because they do teach the EU on a daily basis. And strangely enough, on my second year students, I asked them, have you ever encountered the European Union before when you were at school? Not one of them had. This was the first time they were ever hitting the European Union, these 19, 20-year-olds. And the media play a role in all of this. We may want to come back to that later. Should say at the beginning in terms of where we are in 2017, if we go back to 2000, there were then, of the 28 member states, 20 of them were progressive, left-wing parties in government across 20 states. Today there are 8 in position. So the number has gone down. And there are a few things we've got to think about in all of this. I've picked on Germany just because large member state had elections at the end of September this year. And it's intriguing to look at what's happened in terms of those two largest parties, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. These Germany call these Volksparteien, these people's parties that can mop up loads of people. If you go back to the 80s, they were capturing 80% of the actual electorate. When you look at what's happened over the time since the 80s to the present day, that number has begun to go down. Together, collectively, both the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats captured 52% of the vote in September. Now, of course, this means new parties are arriving on the scene. One of them, of course, is the Green Party, obviously, and the green sort of line going across. This is the period from 2013 to 2017, and the Green Party, you see, is hovering just below the 10% there. The yellow one, of course, is the Liberals, and the red one, the other new party, is Die Linke, or relatively new party, Die Linke, descended from the old SED that used to run East Germany. And the blue one is the one we were going back to in a moment, is essentially the Alternative for Germany, which captured 12% of the vote. This new populist party, it has changed in the 4 years since it was created in 2013. It's become a different vehicle, but we'll come on to that. But very much more now populist than it was at the time of its creation. But you see again both the black line and the red line of those two traditional parties losing support. And the question is, what is happening in wider society? Not so much for these Greens, the Liberals, and Die Linke on the left. It's where is this one coming from, the blue one, and why is it capturing, and why did it capture just shy of 13% at the elections this year? Who are those people? What does that party actually believe? What have they been able to tap into? I could expand this map considerably, not enough room to grab everything all the countries actually on. But you can see in most political systems across Europe, there are populist parties of some description there on the left and on the right. You'll see obviously the UK is there, the Netherlands was mentioned. The other one to note is Austria, and I agree with what was said before. Sometimes we get do we get a false image that somehow Brexit and Trump were the two big things of 2016, and actually it's all falling back into place. I don't like doing this, but I'd say I don't think we are. You saw the elections of, in Austria, you saw the elections, first of all, of the Czech Republic last week, where there was a new populist again took the surge, a new populist Eurosceptic prime minister coming into play. But you also looked at Austria. And again, the Freedom Party, this populist party, it may have fallen to third place, but it was 1% behind essentially the major left-wing party. It was 5 points behind the party that actually won, the centre-right party. And it's intriguing to look at because essentially what happens in these cases is those centre-right parties in particular begin to adopt some of the slogans of these more populist parties. And this is exactly what has happened in the Austrian case. And again, you'll see this new Austrian government, there's already a ban coming in various face masks. This could be ski masks as well. It could also be Halloween masks, for that matter. But it's coming into play. They have reached out very much and begun to tackle one of those key themes that some of these far-right parties, populist parties, actually keep pushing with. And it's this idea, one word here really is Islamophobia. It's very much anti-Islam, immigration, but they are making political capital out of all of this. How do we understand all populism in terms of left and right, as I said? When does it emerge? Is it just a response to the economic crisis? Or can we trace it further back? You know, in terms of political science, one of the key authors in the 60s, 70s, was Engelhardt, talked about a silent revolution. I wonder now, do we have a silent counter-revolution? And essentially by that I mean, are there parts of the electorate who, over the period, has been building from the late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and beyond, actually beginning to feel a little bit more annoyed, angry at the system. It takes a while for it to come through in terms of the 2016, 2017, early in other member states, but it was actually there. A resentment against these metropolitan elites, against these university types, which lead you back to some of the Daily Mail headings. Well, when we think about that, debate that. I mean, the main outlines of populism essentially are what they define as the people. These populists are looking after the interests of the people. They don't belong to the establishment, though inevitably many of them actually do, but hey, that's forgotten about. They're looking after the people. They're against that elite, be it the media, be it universities, be it the established politicians, and they present themselves as outsiders. And in the midst of all this, they begin to present the idea of others, and the others we may come on and actually look at. But think about it, is it too strong to say it's a bit of a revenge? Revenge is a strong word, but are some of these people who are voting for these more populist movements, is it a revenge against the establishment? They know, they know what they're told. So if you think of the Brexit referendum, or the EU referendum, they knew that they were actually going to annoy some people in terms of who was advocating Remain, who was advocating Leave, but those advocating Remain, just simply ignore them. Don't listen to them. This is all the whole idea of the role of experts coming into play in all of this. If you look at the movements of populism on both the left and the right, and essentially it's those bottom lot from UKIP all the way down to the Freedom Party, you can see those key themes. For most of them, it is anti the Eurozone. For some of them, it's not anti-EU integration, it's anti the Eurozone. It's anti-establishment, anti-European Union. Note this one currently isn't the one in Germany. Anti-immigration, and it is the anti-Islam. And it's those last two that have really been pushed by many of these populist parties. There is something different. There's a challenge. It's a challenge to civilization. This idea of European civilization, it is presented as a threat to civilization. Different cultures, different norms, different values. There is a danger here. The two parties, again, here they are, almost hand in hand. You'll recognise the guy on the left, Nigel Farage, and it was the leader of the Alternative for Deutschland. She's now stepped aside as this party moves further to the right. But it's intriguing to look at both of those parties because essentially they began life, break-offs of conservative forces in the country. They essentially had a populist message in terms of the UKIP coming into play. Very much it began life as a single-issue party, just to leave the European Union. Over time, it's begun to expand, trying to find a different range of policies, but it has been pushing to the right. And it always claimed there always was another far harder line, far-right party on the wings in both cases. In terms of Germany, with this National Democratic Party of Germany, electorally really totally insignificant, a few blips now and again, but mostly irrelevant. And the same thing in terms of the UK. There was always the BNP out there. So they weren't far right like those parties. They presented them something as populist, with a populist agenda. And you see a lot of this, how they're trying to reach out to that wider audience. Again, you had the UK, and it worked. Opinion polls and data done afterwards will tell you that it's worked really well. And what I'm here, I should say, is that some of my colleagues in Edinburgh have been doing analysis of Twitter feeds. And one group have looked at 60 million Twitter feeds, would you believe, in the period from the start of 2016 all the way through to the start of this year. They tell me, and they told others in the publications, that really in terms of Twitter, there wasn't much activity on the EU referendum. All throughout the first half of 2016, it only begins to rise as the month of June, as we get close to the referendum, June 2016, but it only really spikes in a substantial way on the day of the 24th, and the most common hashtag is, what exactly is the EU? So you get this suddenly huge interest, then too late. And it's a really seismic moment. I mean, we shouldn't, I think, underestimate the fact, whereas Trump, they get a chance to re-elect Trump, or throw out Trump in 4 years' time, 3.5 years' time in the States. Brexit is this process, is what then happens. Is the UK weaker, stronger? We can debate all that. But here are some of the elements here. The UK talked about taking control back. This essentially is believe in Germany, trust yourself in Germany. These are some of the posters, and you've got to make your own minds up here in terms of how you want to define some of these, in terms of the imagery they're putting across. Remember, this is the AfD. Supposedly it's a populist party. Is it moving further to the right? The first one up here is, if you want new Germans, we'll make them ourselves. Keep thinking this other mentality in all of this. This is to do with a series of horrific incidents in terms of Cologne railway station New Year's Eve 2 years ago, when women were attacked. More security for our wives and daughters, it reads. You know, this idea, this threat is out there. This one, of course, is clearly what they're doing. We don't want burqas. And this one, they had to remove this one because it was deemed too offensive. And again, the whole idea of attacking Islam again, because they say that we can't actually eat pork meat. And interesting in terms of the Front National in France, they will all claim to be inclusive. They believe in people adopting French culture. For those towns controlled by mayoralties that belong to the Front National, they hold parties over the summer. Barbecues over the summer. That's not a problem, that's quite good, bring everyone there, but essentially these are barbecues that only serve pork, in terms of deliberately done, but feeding into themes, which essentially are these, and some of these have already been mentioned, the idea of nationalism, people, history and pride, and I think there is a huge amount of nostalgia in all of this, and I think I described in a recent book in terms of the Agatha Christie sort of era. The next time you're watching David Suchet, or if you do watch David Suchet on TV, just look at the background, look for the different types of faces you may actually see, look at the idea of how deferential everyone seemed to know their play. What sort of image of society are you actually seeing? Of course, that's fiction, but the idea of taking people back somehow resonates. The success, we can look at the EU referendum campaign in the UK in terms of Brexit. The problem is that both sides didn't know what led a disastrous campaign. The Remain camp had a disastrous campaign. They thought the economy would actually win it. It was trumped by the emotion from a very early days. Other things coming through, the anti-Islam, the climate change, they're there. The deniers are all here. European crisis. It's all about European identity being challenged. Many of these parties refer to Christianity. That's how you define yourself from the other. Direct democracy. Now, there's another key theme coming through. We don't really get more referendums. They seem to be the way ahead. Law and order, morality against same-sex marriage, traditional role for women, some of them on conscription for males at the age of 18. But these themes come around time and time again in all of these parties. And they seem to resonate. Not really a lot you can say here in terms of a lot of debate over the last year about facts. What's facts? What's fiction? Do we know the difference in all of this? Does it really matter? It's how you portray it all. And finally, to say in terms of where we might be in 2017. Marine Le Pen may have lost the French presidential election earlier this year. She was, I don't think, bound to lose, but all polls said that she would not win, but she still won a hefty number of those seats. Number of those votes. Do we have a decline of mainstream parties in terms of vote share and party membership? Big exception to this, of course, is the Labour Party, which is going through a spike in terms of new members. But the Conservatives apparently are now less than 100,000 members. So it's going down. What does this mean? What does it say about society? Is there growing dissatisfaction with the establishment and their views? If so, why is that the case? Can we begin to challenge that? How do we explain Brexit? How do we explain Trump? That'll keep political scientists busy for quite a while. But already we know some of the key issues that they're coming through on all this. Can the populists deliver? Does it matter? You will see, for example, in Austria, it looks like the Freedom Party are going to enter government. You're in an even bizarre situation in terms of Germany. That success of the Alternative for Deutschland, which is now the third largest party, no one will touch. But that is Angela Merkel. And I think in terms of the media and a lot of the attention on this, the media really does a really bad job in the UK at explaining a whole host of things. And this is another one of them. The largest economy in Europe. Will Merkel ever get a deal? She's some of those things that she's fighting with now. She tries to forge what they call the Jamaica coalition. She's trying to bring in both the Greens, trying to bring in both the Liberal Democrats, and her fellow Christian social, those Christian social unions of the area, and she is struggling over things like climate change and migration because they very much differ. If she were to form a coalition, a grand coalition with the SPD, if they go back on the words and say, look, this other option isn't working, we deal with the SPD, you're going to really move into very strange, difficult territory, because it could be, if you get both the SPD and the CDU in a coalition, the third largest party is the AfD. If they can ever establish themselves as a cohesive unit, could they then proclaim they are the opposition? So that's, I think, why you won't see that. Do they push other parties to the right? I think that's the clear case. And if you look at those centre-right parties, the rise of these populist right parties, or radical right populist parties, are doing exactly that. And something else that I want to pick up, we've seen in terms of events post-Brexit, we've seen it in the US, we've seen it elsewhere, is the rise, do we sour the wider political climate? There has been a rise in hate crime. There were 62,000 hate crimes, now we need to specify the different types of crimes, in England and Wales last year alone. All indications are that they are higher for this time, and they're going to be higher for 2017. There are issues we see them here as well, unfortunately. There is a rise in racist attacks. Are liberal democracies under attack? Well, we all got to think about, debate in many ways. And if they are, then how do we actually respond? And I think this is one of the real challenges for progressive politics. How do we engage? This morning we talked about how do you get people who belong to the to various green movements, how do you get them to vote? How do you begin to, is there a wider, vote for the Green Party, is there a wider sort of discussion here? How do you connect with the public at large in general? How do you get them to understand where they are in terms of the political systems they actually live in and what the key issues are? And sometimes the simplest sounding solutions are by far not the easiest or even achievable. But I will leave it there. Thank you.